How much web could a web slinger sling if a web slinger could sling web? Well, I guess it depends on whether or not that web is produced organically or mechanically. A question I get asked a lot about Spider-Man is whether his web is organic, like what we see in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man duology, or if his webbing is created mechanically, like in the Mark Webb series of Spidey films. The answer, interestingly enough, is both. Many of you will know already that in the comics, Spider-Man built his own web shooters in the very first issue. In fact, Spider-Man's web shooters actually predate Spider-Man himself. Technically. Spider-Man made his big debut in Amazing Fantasy number 15 from 1962, a comic that tells the origin of the web slinger. And in this origin story, before Peter Parker ever puts on his costume, before he ever calls himself Spider-Man, he single-handedly invents 2 mechanical web shooters to wear on his wrists since, quote, a spider needs a web. And also that radioactive spider bite kinda left him hanging in this department. Spider-Man's web shooters are such an incredibly vital part of who he is. They play up Peter's intellect and showcase his inner scientist. Sure, he gained incredible powers thanks to a random spider bite, but he also worked for his abilities. The web shooters also give him a vulnerability during times when they would get damaged, or he'd be out of web fluid, etc. These scenarios would create tension in the story and force Peter to be a little more creative. And yes, as I just mentioned, the web in the wrist shooters comes from capsules or cartridges of web fluid, which get loaded into the devices. The whole thing activates via a very sensitive trigger right in the middle of Spidey's palm, which is why he makes this gesture a lot, which I'm just now discovering I'm terrible at doing. Ugh. Though in most continuities, he does have to hit the button twice, like a double click of a mouse. This is to avoid unintentionally firing off the web whenever he simply makes a fist to punch people in the face. The web shooters also have different settings that allow for things like a single web line, which he notably uses to swing around the city and grapple objects or even people. Wait, too soon. Always too soon. Spider-Man can also adjust his web shooters to achieve a fine spray of webbing, which is probably better for catching people, or a thick goop, which he mainly uses to blind people. Right in the eyes. The webbing also dissolves automatically after an hour or so, though sometimes a special solvent has been needed for certain kinds of webbing, but we can sit here all day and talk in depth about how exactly the web shooters work, but we should probably discuss the idea of Spider-Man's web being organically created by his own body. It wasn't just the movies where this happened, it made its way to comics as well for a brief period of time. There was, of course, the black Spidey suit, which created its own organic webbing, but that turned out to be an alien symbiote, so Pete had to get rid of that as fast as possible. Even still, that webbing wasn't really generated by Pete's own body the way we saw it in the movies. For that, we'll need to examine a Spider-Man arc from 2004. In Spectacular Spider-Man number 15, a new villain arrives in New York known as the Queen. Using her super strength and sonic scream powers, she defeats Spidey, kisses him, kidnaps him, and then kisses him some more. And if you're wondering what's up with all the spit swapping, it's not just because comic book writers like to use Spider-Man as nerdy wish fulfillment, though I'm sure that's a factor. You see, one of Queen's other powers is that her saliva contains a mutagenic enzyme which, among other things, transforms the victim into a giant spider monster. When it came to Peter Parker, Queen was more interested in the spider part of Spider-Man, so she used her super spit to gradually mutate him into an 8-legged freak. When he was full-blown spider, it was revealed that the transformation was really just a cocoon of sorts. I don't know, it was really weird. Either way, Peter hatched from a giant arachnid husk and was back to normal. With one notable exception. He now had the ability to shoot webs out of his wrists organically. He no longer needed his web shooters. There is speculation that the Sam Raimi movies were the reason why they made this change in the comics, and we certainly don't have to look hard for times when movies were responsible for changing comics, especially with Marvel. We even recorded a whole podcast about it. But why did the Raimi Spider-Man saga include the organic webbing to begin with? The answer is a bit of a long story, but I'm going to try to keep it brief. Sam Raimi's script took elements from a previous treatment by James Cameron, which is often cited as the source of Spidey having organic webbing. If you take the time to read Cameron's script, which you absolutely should do because it is completely bonkers, and I've linked it down in the description, Spider-Man becomes a bit of a celebrity and actually tells an interviewer that his webbing comes from mechanical web shooters, even though it really is was made naturally by spinnerets in his wrists. He does this partly to throw people off the trail of his secret identity, and also because if he ever is found out, he doesn't want people to label him as a freak. Back in the comics, Spidey's new organic spinnerets that grew into his forearms still worked a lot like his wrist shooters. They fired web with roughly the same force, and he still had to press 2 fingers in the middle of his palms to activate them for no explained reason. But the biggest benefit was the fact that Pete wouldn't have to keep reloading his webbing anymore. Since it was all generated naturally, he could create a seemingly endless supply, like when he let loose on Iron Man and created this whole mess. But these natural spinnerets didn't last forever though. It was only about 3 years later that the web head would be back in his old wrist shooters. In Brand New Day from 2008, Spidey has to deal with a thug who stole one of his web shooters that he was, for some reason, using again. So what happened? Why did the mutation suddenly disappear? Well, we need to take a look at the story that happened before Brand New Day, an infamous story in Spider-Man's history titled One More Day. Just to catch you up real fast, during Civil War, when Peter Parker revealed his identity as Spider-Man to the world, Wilson Fisk hired an assassin to kill Parker. Unfortunately, the assassin missed Peter, and the bullet instead hit Peter's fragile Aunt May. Desperate to save his dying aunt, Peter and the love of his life, Mary Jane, made a literal deal with the devil, Mephisto. In exchange for saving May, Peter and MJ, who were married at the time, must sacrifice their unconditional love for each other. Not only that, but history will be rewritten so that they were never married at all. MJ would do anything for Peter, so she willingly gave up her past, present, and future with him in order to save Aunt May. Peter followed suit, and a deal was struck. Okay, don't even get me started on the two of them giving up a lifetime of happiness to save an old lady who looks as though she's consistently on the brink of death anyway. And yeah, I know that Marvel only did this because they thought married Spider-Man was boring Spider-Man and that Peter was more relatable when he was young and single, and I don't disagree with that. I just feel like this was a dumb way to handle it. But I digress. When it was all over and the deal with Mephisto was realized, the world was a little different. Aunt May was alive and well, Peter's life as Spider-Man was once again a secret from the public, and most importantly, he didn't have organic webbing anymore. We know that Spidey had his organic webbing during One More Day because that's where this scene comes from that we alluded to earlier. But in the very next story, the aforementioned Brand New Day, the wall crawler is back to his wrist shooters. So while One More Day was never explicitly stated as the reason why Spidey went back to his web shooters, it's really the only logical explanation that we have. Except there's one problem. It's not like the whole story with the Queen was erased from this new timeline. It still very much happened. It was revisited later in 2011's Spider Island event when the Queen came back, partnered with Jackal, and gave citizens of New York their own spider powers, including organic webbing, before turning into a giant spider monster army. The Queen even reflects on the interaction she had with Spider-Man, so we know that that story definitely still took place. Even weirder, Peter himself makes a comment implying that he did, in fact, at one point have organic webbing. When his girlfriend at the time, Carly, gets spider powers, she asks Pete if he can hook her up with some web shooters, since her organic webbing is all dried up. He tells her to drink plenty of water and eat starchy foods to replenish it. Curious, Carly asks how Peter would know that, to which he simply replied that he's friends with Spider-Man. And that is all the explanation we get, and it is left kind of vague, but it does seem like he's saying that at one point in time he did have the power to create his own organic webbing. And this definitely makes it harder to determine what actually did happen, and honestly, we'll likely never know for sure. Here's an awkward segue. If you're wondering why they decided to switch to artificial web shooters in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, you can thank Brian Michael Bendis, an award-winning comic book writer behind such works like Powers, New Avengers, Ultimate Spider-Man, and much more. Because of his history with the wall crawler, Bendis was brought in during the development of 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man, and was unknowingly the deciding vote in determining whether or not Spider-Man would have organic or mechanical web shooters. He voted for the latter, and that's what we got. Live-action, mechanical, wrist-mounted web shooters. I hope the MCU follows suit with that. I have no doubt that they will. Although Mortalk7 on Twitter pointed out that there is always a third option. #MagicWebs. What do you guys think? Do you prefer Spider-Man with his mechanical web shooters or organic webbing? Or perhaps you want to jump on the #MagicWebs bandwagon. There's plenty of room. Basically just me. If you want to learn more about Spider-Man, click right here to learn what happened to Peter Parker's parents. The video also explores the story that Mark Webb's Spider-Man movies were likely trying to tell, it might just make you appreciate them a little bit more for what they could have been. So click right here to check it out. We've also got a fun video examining whether great power really does equal great responsibility. We talk a lot about Superior Spider-Man, which is one of my personal favorite Spider-Man runs, so click here to watch that one. And make sure you hit that big sexy subscribe button so you don't miss out on all the new videos we make for you every week that explore the history, science, art, and philosophy behind your favorite comic book superheroes. My name is Scott, and I will see you right here on Friday for another video. See ya.